Hi there. My name is Mr. Dalton, and do you know what time it is? It is Take Time to Read. And today I am going to be reading The World According to Humphrey. I'll be reading chapter 1, and Humphrey is a hamster. He's not just any hamster. He's a special, smart hamster who knows how to communicate. He likes to be in the classroom, and he likes children. And a certain teacher he likes, and a certain teacher he's not sure about. So, let's read The World According to Humphrey. It is everybody's favorite hamster that lives inside of a classroom. Oh, Humphrey writes, "Today was the worst day of my life. Mrs. Mack left room 26 of Longfellow School for good, and that's bad. Worse yet, Mrs. Brisbane came back. Until today, I didn't even know there was a Mrs. Brisbane. Lucky me. Now, I want to know, what was Mrs. Mack thinking? She must have known that soon she'd be leaving without me, and Mrs. Brisbane would come back to room 26, and I would be stuck with Mrs. Brisbane. Oh boy. I still love Mrs. Mack more than any human or any hamster on the whole world. But what was she thinking? You can learn a lot about yourself by taking care of another species, she told me on the way home the day she got me. You can teach these kids a thing or two. Well, that's what she was thinking, but I don't think she was thinking very clearly. I'm never going to squeak to her again. Of course, I'll probably never see her again because she's gone, gone, gone. But if she comes back, I'm not even going to look at her. Nope, nope, nope. So, she knows that I know that last sentence doesn't make sense, but it's hard to make sense when your heart is broken. On the other hand, until Mrs. Mack arrived, I was going nowhere down at the Panorama. My days were spent sitting around looking at a bunch of furry things in cages just like me. We were treated all right. We had regular meals, we got our cages clean, we had music, we were in a pet store. Over the music, Carl, the store clerk, would answer the phone, and he would say, "Open 9 to 9, 7 days a week, corner 5th and Alder, next to the Dairy Maid." Back then, I thought I would never see 5th and Alder, much less the Dairy Maid. Sometimes I would see human eyes and human noses, not always as clean as they should be, and they would be poking up against the glass where my cage was, looking at me. But nothing ever came of it. The children were excited to see me, but the parents usually had other ideas. "Oh, come see the fishes, Cornelia. So colorful and so much easier to take care of a hamster," Mama might say. "Oh, no, 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 Norbert. They have the cutest little puppies over here. No hamsters today. After all, a dog is a boy's best friend." So there we were, hamsters and gerbils and mice and guinea pigs. We weren't nearly as popular as the fish or the cats or the dogs. Wow, wow. Anyway, I suspected I'd be spinning my wheel at the Panorama pet store forever and ever. But once Mrs. Mack came in and saw me, she carried me out of the store a short 6 weeks ago. My life changed fast, 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 fast. And I saw 5th. I saw Alder. I saw the Dairy Maid with the statue of a cow in an apron outside the store. Wow. I was dozing when she first came to Panorama Pet Store, as I do during the day, because hamsters like to stay up in the nighttime. "Well, hello," a warm voice woke me up, And I opened my eyes and I saw a mass of bouncy black curls, a big happy smile, huge dark eyes. She smelled like apples, and it was love at first sight. "Well, aren't you the bright-eyed one?" she asked. "And might I return the compliment?" I replied. Of course, my sounds came out squeak, 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 squeak. Well, Mrs. Mack opened up her purse with the big pink and blue flowers on it. "I will take him," she told Carl. "She's obviously the most intelligent and handsome hamster you have." Well, Carl grunted. Then Mrs. Mack picked out a respectable cage. Okay, her cage she picked out was not the 3-story pagoda I had my eye on, but it was a nice cage. And then soon, amidst squeals of encouragement from my friends in the small pet department, from the teeniest white mouse to the lumbering chinchilla, I left Petorama Pet Store with high hopes. Yay! Well, we sped down the street in Mrs. Mack's bright yellow car. She called it a bug, but I could see it's really a car. And she carried my cage up the stairs to her apartment, and we ate apples. Yummy! And we watched TV, and she let me run around outside my cage. And she gave me my own name. She called me Humphrey. And she told me all about room 26, where we would be going the next morning. "And since you are an intelligent hamster who is going to school, I have a present for you, Humphrey," she said. And she gave me a tiny little notebook and a tiny little pencil. "Hey, I got these for you at the doll shop." And she tucked them behind my mirror where nobody would see them except me. Of course, it might be a while before you can learn and read and write, she said, but you're smart. You'll catch on fast. Little did she know I could already make out some words from my long, boring days at Petorama. I knew words like chew toys, kibble, pooper scoopers. Remember, a hamster is all grown up at about 5 weeks old. So if I could learn all the skills I needed for life in 5 weeks, how long could it possibly take to learn how to read? I'll tell you, 1 week. Yep. In a week, I could read and write a little with my tiny pencil. In addition to schoolwork, I learned quite a bit about the other students in room 26, like lower your voice, AJ, speak up, say ya, and wait for the bell, Garth, and Golden Miranda. Even after I found out her name is really Miranda Golden, I thought of her as Golden Miranda because she had long blonde hair. After all, I am a golden hamster. Yes, life in room 26 suited me well during the day. My cage had all the comforts a hamster could ask for. I had bars on the windows to protect me from my enemies. I had a little sleeping house where no one could see or bother me. There was my wheel to spin on, and of course a lovely pile of nesting material. My mirror came in handy to check up on my grooming to see how I looked, and that's where I hid my notebook, behind the mirror. In one corner I kept my food, the opposite corner I kept my bedroom and bathroom, because hamsters like to keep their poo away from their food. Well, who wouldn't want to keep that away from food? Yeah. All my needs were taken care of in one convenient cage. At night, I went home from school with Mrs. Mack, and we would watch TV or we would listen to music. Sometimes Mrs. Mack played her bongo drums. Boom, 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 boom. And she made a tunnel on the floor so I could race and wiggle to my hamster's heart content. I'm happy. Oh, the memories of those 6 weeks with Morgan McNamara. But she let us call her Mrs. Mack. That was sweet. On the weekends, Mrs. Mack and I had all kinds of adventures. She put me in her shirt pocket and she took me to do the laundry. And she had friends over, and they would laugh, and they would make a big fuss over me. And she even took me for a bike ride once. I can still feel the wind in my fur. I did not have an inkling until this morning of the unspeakable thing she was about to do to me. On the way to work, she said, "Humphrey, I hate to tell you this, but this is my last day in room 26, and I'm going to miss you." What was she saying? I hung onto my wheel for dear life. Mrs. Mack is going. Oh, no. You see, this is really Mrs. Brisbane's class, but just before school started, her husband was in an accident, and I had to take over the class because she was taking care of her husband. And today she's coming back for good. Good? I don't think that's good at all. Besides, I want to see the world, Humphrey, she told me. Well, fine with me. I thoroughly enjoyed all the world I've seen so far and would go to the ends of the earth with Mrs. Mack. But she wasn't finished yet. I cannot take you with me, Humphrey. Oh, all hope's dashed completely. Besides, the kids need you to teach them the responsibility. Mrs. Brisbane needs you, too. Unfortunately, she hadn't told Mrs. Brisbane that. Mrs. Brisbane was already in room 26 when we arrived. She smiled at Mrs. Mack and she shook her hand. Thank you for taking over my class. Then she frowned at me and said, "Is that some kind of rodent?" Ooh. And Mrs. Mack gave her a speech at how much kids can learn from taking care of another species. And Mrs. Brisbane looked horrified and said, "I can't stand rodents. Take it back." But Mrs. Mack didn't bat an eyelash. She put my cage in its usual place next to the window and said the kids were very attached to me. And she attached Dr. Harvey H. Hammer's Guide to the Care and Feeding in Hamsters to the cage with the chart to make sure I was fed and my cage was cleaned up on time. The children know what to do. You won't have to do a thing, Mrs. Max and Mrs. Brisbane. And Mrs. Brisbane glared at me like, Well, just then my fellow students came streaming into the room, and in a half hour Mrs. Mack said goodbye to everyone, including me. "I'll never forget you, Humphrey," she whispered. "Don't you forget me, too." "Not likely, but I don't know if I can ever forgive you," I squeaked, squeaked, squeaked. And then she was gone without me. Well, Mrs. Brisbane didn't even come close to my cage until recess. Then she walked over and said, "Mister, you've got to go." But she doesn't know my secret. The latch to my cage door does not work. It never has. It's the lock that doesn't lock. And I've got news from Mrs. Brisbane. If I got to go, it'll be when I decide it's time to go. Not her. No. Meanwhile, I'm not turning my back on this woman. Not for a second. If I ever disappear and somebody finds this notebook, check out Mrs. Brisbane, please. See you in until I read again.